Dean parked his '86 Chevy, a treasure of memories, in guest parking, right outside the towering Vaughn corporate building at 8:47 a.m., directly where his confirmation email had officially told him to park. Shutting down, the old engine exhaled a deep, weary metallic sigh. It was the sound of 38 years of honest, hard-working labor, where a father's heavy steel workhorse finally gets a moment to rest. To some, the faded blue hood was worthless rust, but to him it felt like a comfortable, well-worn pair of denim jeans. The truck bed held a steel toolbox and some neatly bundled papers, along with a folded tarp reserved for sudden rainstorms. Then CEO Claire Vaughn stepped from her glossy Escalade, glaring at the old Chevy like an eyesore. Her gaze immediately turned to ice. She snapped at Tyler Knox behind her, raising her voice for everyone to hear. Ignoring the crowd, she demanded, "Who let that piece of junk park in front of my building?" Dean stepped out, raising a calloused hand to explain why he was there. But Claire had already completely dismissed him. "Tow it away," she commanded, "before my investors arrive." Yet 30 minutes later, she was swiping her card in a Chevy showroom to buy a new truck. You and I must unpack those 30 minutes. This story started long before Dean drove down Peachtree Street. It begins exactly how these costly lessons usually start, with a shallow, arrogant choice, judging a man's entire worth by his vehicle. Vaughn Development owned floors 9 through 22 of a flashy glass midtown high-rise, deep in Atlanta, and on that quiet Thursday morning, the entire luxury office was absolutely buzzing, sweating with that controlled panic right before elite investors arrive. 3 major players from Holloway Capital, the wealthy group funding a $14 million project. They were arriving at 9:15 sharp. Tyler Knox spent all of last week obsessing over the crucial pitch deck, a 40-slide tour outlining their massive property acquisition, the demolition timeline, plus the stellar profit margins for what looked like their most lucrative deal in 3 long years. Brooke Haynes even ordered gourmet pastries to stock the boardroom, and tested the main screens twice, and printed executive summaries on that thick, premium cardstock Claire reserved for wealthy high rollers. Everything looked absolutely flawless. That was the corporate fantasy, at least for now. But Dean Mercer was a mechanic. He ran a small repair shop over on Memorial Drive down in Decatur. A modest 2-bay garage he built 7 years ago with a small business loan and a used hydraulic lift he rebuilt with his own hands before ever working on a car. He provided honest paychecks for 3 loyal, hard-working local guys. He drove a memory-filled truck older than his customers' marriages. He was also raising a 10-year-old son, Nolan, teaching him how classic engines and carburetors actually worked. Lacking a suit or obvious wealth, corporate elites looked right past this single father. Honestly, you and I wouldn't expect to see him at a luxury tower on a Thursday morning. Yet he belonged right there, regardless of his worn steel truck. He had a solid, official appointment booked on their corporate calendar, plus a thick folder of papers that, if those wealthy bosses had actually bothered to check, would have saved a neighborhood of struggling families from massive stress and deep emotional heartbreak. This critical meeting was arranged 6 days ago, right after Dean answered Warren Hale's urgent call, a proud 81-year-old retiree, a retired principal whose grandfather poured his life into building the historic Anchor Building, the very same local landmark Vaughn Development wanted to demolish for their cold corporate expansion. Warren discovered those priceless family files while cleaning out his late mother's tiny, beloved house. The original 1961 deed protecting a whole row of affordable neighborhood family homes, together with an active city preservation order from 4 years ago that was never legally overturned. He spotted the danger on a simple neighborhood flyer. The greedy lines on the corporation's glossy plans claimed historic local properties that absolutely did not, by any real legal standard, belong to that greedy, wealthy corporation. Warren had no wealthy contacts inside that corporate tower. But he knew Dean, a hard-working single father who spent 2 brutal, freezing winters doing free, vital repairs to keep shivering neighborhood children warm on Hale Street. So Warren trusted Dean with everything he had. You and I know that rare trust earned only by those who sacrifice for others. Dean boldly called the company's elite legal team himself. He explained the situation with the quiet honesty of a blue-collar father who respected the law. letting them know he held records that would halt their massive development. The secretary took his name, and 2 days later they scheduled him for a Thursday morning meeting at 9 o'clock. Dean carefully printed out the confirmation email and organized those critical files into neat tabs, then drove across the city to hand them over, because Warren wanted a real person to actually look at them, rather than some cold fax machine. He parked his older truck in the guest lot, exactly where their official email told him to, arriving 12 minutes early, because a dedicated working father always respects other people's time. His worn, memory-filled Chevy Silverado stood out dramatically, parked right beside a sleek Range Rover that easily cost over $200,000. On his right sat a spotless white Mercedes with expensive custom license plates. Even the other pickup parked close by was a pristine brand-new Ram with glowing chrome bumpers and expensive polished rails. Dean's dented truck sat there like a humble truth, carrying a lifetime of family memories among corporate luxury. A real vehicle that any decent person would look at with respect. But you and I know that wealthy elites only see value in a price tag. CEO Claire saw only a pile of junk ruining her precious corporate image. Her arrogant assistant Tyler sneered at the old truck and voiced his disgust, joking that some poor laborer from the cheap cleaning crew had gotten lost searching for the back service entrance. He chuckled softly, the way wealthy snobs hide cruel insults behind casual office humor. Claire never bothered checking the visitor log. She never stopped to consider if that worn-out truck belonged to someone with an appointment. She ordered security to tow his pride and joy away before her wealthy investors arrived at 9:15. When honest Dean stepped up to introduce himself, Tyler cut him off, showing you and me that corporate elites only value a shiny surface. Look, Dean actually had a scheduled appointment. But the guard, Tyler, claimed the corporate system showed absolutely nothing. He quietly reached for the printed confirmation tucked inside his folder. But the wealthy CEO Claire already swept past him through the glass doors. Without even looking back, she ordered security to tow his eyesore of a truck. Dean just stood on the sidewalk, quietly bracing for the inevitable. The tow truck arrived in under 7 minutes flat. He didn't argue with the driver. The man was only doing what he was paid to do. So he just stood silently, folder tucked under his arm, and watched that cold steel hook slide right under the front of his old pickup. The only sign of the heavy toll this took was his rough hands clenching, gripping the edge of his folder tightly and then letting go. Look closer. Inside that rusty old cab, a small laminated photo swayed as it lifted. It was a dark-haired woman, laughing happily outside a local hardware store. On some warm afternoon, holding up a paint roller like a grand trophy. The tow truck finally made a sharp left at the property line. Dean watched it closely until it vanished completely from sight. Then he turned back to the corporate entrance, holding his paperwork with a calm face. He realized long ago that the only thing he can truly control is his next step. Dean walked up to the reception desk and politely explained that he had an official meeting scheduled with their legal team. The receptionist scanned her computer screen and found absolutely nothing. She dismissively told him to just call their main line. He explained he had driven all the way from Decatur with urgent legal documents. She claimed there was nothing she could do without an appointment, offering a hollow apology for the trouble in that robotic, cold, and highly rehearsed way of someone reciting a cold corporate script they have repeated hundreds of times. A nearby employee named Brooke, holding a tablet, heard every single word. She heard everything, making a quick, selfish corporate calculation in her head, choosing her secure office job over a struggling stranger, knowing Tyler held serious grudges. She stayed quiet. Dean didn't even blame her. Just before he had walked inside, he had politely asked security to grab a few irreplaceable, personal things from his truck before they towed it. But the cold guard told him the truck was already gone, and this single father would have to deal with the tow yard himself. Dean's mind instantly raced to a little green notebook kept in the glove box. Paige had originally started it as a simple maintenance log. Every oil change, every single new part. Every repair they made together over 4 solid years of owning that truck. You and I know how ordinary things hold our lives. Over time, that worn book became absolutely priceless. She had tenderly written the exact day they bought the truck on the very first page. She even took time in the margins of a July maintenance update to note that their son Nolan had been sitting in the truck bed, trying so hard to whistle and failing miserably, yet stubbornly trying for 2 straight hours without complaining even once. In her tidy handwriting, his late wife carefully recorded every road they took to those hard medical appointments. No clinical details, just their precious routes. You and I know that tracing those exact roads was a memory too precious to lose. To a rich man it was junk, but Dean kept her pickup after Paige passed. He almost sold it once, about 8 months after they laid her to rest. When facing that rusty vehicle in his driveway every single morning became too painful to bear. He called some corporate buyers, asking for its raw market price. The offer, next to nothing. No one wanted a beat-up model. It lacked the glossy collector appeal of those pristine, high-end pickups. He simply hung up, walked back inside, and never made another call. To corporate eyes, that vehicle was just an eyesore of worthless scrap. But true wealth is not measured in cash. It held his life story, and money cannot buy that. Tyler threw a smug corporate insult from the mezzanine, laughing loudly, showing off for some corporate executive Dean couldn't see. Think about it. Tyler sneered that real value could never reside in a rusty, worthless old truck. Dean ignored the cruel jibe, gripping his humble project folder instead, calmly straightened the humble documents, and walked toward the elevators, knowing he had an important job to complete. Because you only silence greedy corporate judgment by being 100% right about the facts that matter. He nearly reached the elevator doors when a female executive rushed out of the stairwell, clutching her smartphone and a massive stack of development files. She actually hesitated as she passed him, because she entered the lobby just in time to catch the final words Dean shared with the receptionist. Something about a major error starting long before anyone ever went upstairs. She stopped in her tracks, spun around, and asked his name. Naomi Pierce managed the compliance and community liaison team at Vaughn Development. It was a role that expanded massively in scope over her 3 years because Atlanta's local corporate real estate market became highly complex during that exact same period. She was always incredibly fair and completely unable to ignore an odd detail without tracing it to the source. She asked Dean directly who he was scheduled to meet. He showed his phone, a confirmed 9 o'clock legal meeting about the Hale Street project. She opened the corporate schedule on her phone and quickly found his slot. She also saw it was canceled 11 minutes before he arrived under the logins of Tyler Knox, leaving the cancellation reason box completely empty. She led Dean to a quiet conference room on the 3rd floor, asking him to explain his physical evidence. He laid out his humble documents across the table in neat, perfect order. A direct comparison between the official city boundary map and Vaughn Development's slick corporate acquisition map, with a red circle where the boundaries clashingly overlapped. According to the city's files, that exact block was legally zoned as Hale Street Community Housing, a protected status legally kept on record since the conservation files were processed 4 years. They go see True Value leaves a lasting legacy, filed jointly by the city and nonprofits. Look closely here. To corporate eyes, this block was just Phase 2 demolition. Just empty space to them, but it wasn't empty at all. 4 actual families built lives there. That corner community center held 60 solid years of irreplaceable memories. Dean quietly explained how he saved these precious family papers. He had spent 2 years fixing up cars for free down on Hale Street, doing free repairs for struggling working folks who simply couldn't afford a mechanic. Old Warren Hale was one of those good, honest people. Warren saw how that corporate map completely ignored his family's irreplaceable history. He trusted Dean to deliver the papers, hoping powerful bosses might finally look past appearances and respect their lives. So Dean scheduled the meeting himself. He had no high-priced lawyers or fancy corporate titles to back him. And he had no selfish motive. He just believed in Warren's lifetime of memories, and he knew maps. He drove his worn-out pickup across town just to force them to see, before cold corporate developers poured wet concrete over a family's irreplaceable home. Naomi sat there, listening to every single heartfelt word. She studied that old land survey for a long time. She examined the conservation file, containing an official public record you could easily verify in just under 4 minutes. She stared at the printed schedule of Dean's meeting and how they callously canceled it. But she kept her troubling thoughts entirely to herself, because she desperately needed to verify her dark suspicion before saying anything out loud. She softly asked the mechanic to wait, promising she would return very quickly. Clutching the thick file, she marched straight to the elevator. In a quiet room upstairs, she pulled up public records on her tablet. That quiet neighborhood's historic conservation protection was fully active today. The family's actual property deed was official and totally uncontested. Their community housing protection had never been touched or legally canceled. Yet none of this truth existed in the shiny, glossy corporate project folder. But she uncovered a hidden email chain marked strictly internal, only visible because of her high-level corporate clearance. 2 months ago, a junior worker flagged this boundary dispute. Tyler ordered them to bury it for the wealthy investors. Suddenly, her phone rang. The towing company was on the line. They hooked his old Silverado up completely wrong. They dragged that proud old truck against concrete for a block before realizing their terrible mistake. Its rear axle was now severely bent and broken. The worn metal frame cracked right along an old, memory-filled weld line. It could still roll, but its hard-working days were officially over. She walked back downstairs and delivered the heartbreaking news. He sat in silence, then quietly muttered that he always fixes broken metal. He whispered that precious things shatter when powerful people refuse to listen to others. You and I know that human lives are much harder to rebuild than broken axles. At least bent metal shows you exactly where the fractures are. Naomi grabbed the damning evidence and marched back upstairs, where Tyler was still smugly boasting about their clean title. You and I know status isn't everything, but inside that 22nd floor boardroom, their polished, wealthy world was undisturbed until Naomi burst in. 11 powerful executives sat around that expensive table. Claire led the room, Tyler pitched, and Holloway Capital's wealthy partners watched like hawks. Vaughn Development's top lawyers sat ready, alongside their director of engineering. A couple of analysts watched while Brooke quietly typed notes at a side desk. These wealthy investors were polite, yet highly demanding, running on tight schedules that tolerated no delays. So Naomi's sudden intrusion shattered their high-status bubble, striking these wealthy elites exactly where it hurt, leaving behind a very heavy, tense, uncomfortable silence. With cold, measured CEO arrogance, Claire declared the timing was unacceptable. Fierce and unapologetic, Naomi fired back that this was the exact perfect moment, dropping a thick folder onto the mahogany table right before her. The elite circle held its breath. Claire opened the file. Inside lay the real surveying overlay, 2 conflicting maps placed side by side. A massive discrepancy on the city map, conveniently hidden to turn a family's irreplaceable home into corporate scrap. Next sat a protected conservation document, stamped with an official city reference code. The third page was Warren's actual deed, proof of his home. Fourth was the single dad's meeting, sabotaged by a time-stamped cancellation sent directly from Tyler's account. Claire examined every single paper in order, remaining completely silent throughout. She didn't move a muscle, yet the heavy atmosphere in the room shifted entirely. It became the cold silence of a leader whose arrogant corporate worldview was suddenly crashing down under the weight of undeniable human facts. Tyler quickly claimed those records came from a worthless, unverified source. He argued the map comparison relied on nothing but outdated, useless city files, and argued that the conservation papers had never been processed through their high-end corporate development pipeline. He spoke incredibly fast and defensively, just like a cornered executive rattling off rehearsed excuses to cover up a dirty corporate play. Claire simply stared him down, locking eyes so fiercely that his excuses died in his throat. Then she quietly ordered Naomi to bring the blue-collar mechanic upstairs. Tyler snapped, his voice tight with a sudden desperate panic, arguing that a worthless, grease-stained mechanic had no business entering a high-status corporate negotiation. The room remained silent. 60 seconds later, the single father walked in. The hard-working father pulled up a chair without asking for permission. He brought no fancy files, sitting in quiet, calm dignity. Then he answered the top lawyer's questions in simple, honest terms, pointing directly to the truth lying on their expensive table. When arrogant Tyler sneered again, that a common mechanic lacked the degrees to even speak on official property deeds. Dean looked him dead in the eye, replying with calm, powerful dignity. You don't need a law degree to know the difference between a home filled with irreplaceable memories and some worthless empty square on a rich man's corporate map. You and I know truth outweighs status. The lead investor uncapped his pen, studied the father's proof, and took a note. A deep, heavy silence hung over the boardroom. Claire sat in silence, facing the deep truth of a lifetime of memories she had dismissed as worthless. She was finally forced to face the heavy moral cost that money could never wipe away. Not some sterile corporate balance sheet. The lawyers handle money. This was about human lives. A father drove across Atlanta just to save his family home from her bulldozers. He did everything right, trusting their official corporate channels, arriving with a booked meeting and undeniable proof. But they banned him from the executive parking lot. They towed his truck from a spot he had every right to occupy. Her executives publicly mocked him in front of security guards and junior staff. Yet he still fought his way upstairs to hand over those papers, his final hope. To her, he was just an eyesore, a man whose cheap old truck proved he did not belong. Brooks noticed his phone light up silently on the conference table. She glanced at the screen, leaned toward Claire, and whispered that the impound lot was calling. The mechanics had finished the damage estimate. Fixing that twisted axle and bent frame would cost thousands of dollars. Claire stood up, halted the entire project for a full title review, and told Dean to follow her. The impound lot sat on a dusty road behind some crumbling West Atlanta warehouses. And there sat his battered old Silverado, shoved into a dark corner of the chain-link yard, leaning at a sickening angle. One rear wheel was shoved violently up onto a concrete curb. We both know that look, treated like garbage by wealthy people who judged its value by its faded paint. Up close, the mindless, brutal damage was painfully obvious. The left rear axle was bent completely out of shape, the heavy bumper twisted violently inward. His heavy steel toolbox lay thrown wide open in the truck bed. Wrenches, sockets, and tools were scattered everywhere, tossed around by the violent, careless jolt of the tow truck. He pulled the heavy passenger door open and it squeaked loudly. A familiar creak Dean had heard 10,000 times before. That specific metallic resistance he had personally adjusted twice before. Once 3 springs ago, and again last winter when the freezing cold stripped the grease off those old hinges. He reached inside the cab to rescue 3 priceless treasures. The faded laminated photograph tucked gently above the rearview mirror. His old green notebook, and the socket wrench his dad gave him when he signed his shop lease. His father had just pressed it into his hands without any fuss, saying, "Every single job is exactly the same job. You just have to use the right tools." Claire stood a few paces back in a heavy, quiet silence. She watched how gently the father held each seemingly worthless object. It was the quiet, habitual care of a man putting irreplaceable memories back exactly where they belonged. She finally stepped closer as he rested that battered old notebook on the tailgate. She did not dare ask for permission to read those private pages. We must ask ourselves what truly matters. She looked down because the worn page lay open, showing 2 different handwritings. One was heavy and deliberate, while the other was a child's tiny loops along the messy margins. That sweet, childlike handwriting had scrawled along the edges of a page detailing a simple brake line fix. A note that 4-year-old Nolan had proudly helped, carrying a greasy brake line all the way from the garage, holding it high over his head like a trophy. He thought a cheap plastic trophy meant he had succeeded in life. Just 3 scribbled lines on paper, but she read them twice. Quietly, she laid the old notebook down, knowing how completely useless words become when real grief fills the room. Sometimes talking just cannot add any real comfort or value. She ordered Brooke to drive her own car to the nearest Chevrolet dealership. 31 minutes later, they pulled onto the Marietta Boulevard lot. She walked straight to a shiny new 2024 Silverado. A massive Navy truck, completely ignoring the eager salesman walking over. After 2 brief questions about towing capacity, she bluntly announced she was buying it. This powerful machine was built to handle the brutal daily grind. The endless heavy labor that Dean faced at his auto shop. Towing heavy machines and hauling heavy steel tools all day. Hard work that would quickly destroy any of those cheap, flimsy modern trucks. Soon the sales manager returned carrying a thick stack of paperwork. Claire handed over her personal card, bypassing the company expense account completely. This was her mistake to fix, and she wanted that clearly understood. Clenching the heavy key fob, she turned and held it out to Dean. She knew this fancy new vehicle could never replace his beloved old truck. She was beginning to see that cash value meant nothing compared to a lifetime of memories. She only wanted to make things right in the most honest, direct way she could think of. Dean stared at the new keys for a long moment, not moving to take them. "Let's stop and think about this," he asked, where her real mistake actually began. It was not calling the tow truck or when the metal hook hooked his axle. He told her to look back much further, but she stayed silent. An awkward silence fell over the entire dealership floor. Nearby, a salesman sat at his desk pretending to study some paperwork. Overhead, the bright lights buzzed quietly, filling the room with that heavy silence of a cold corporate space where people trade their money for metal. Claire looked down at the shiny keys in her trembling hand and confessed. She had only seen a worthless piece of junk, completely failing to look past the dented steel to see the beautiful soul of the father standing before her. Finally, Dean accepted the key. He held it tightly, saying her fancy new truck could never replace the soul of his old, broken-down Chevy. She owed him genuine respect, and that had absolutely nothing to do with buying a new car. Nodding quickly, she promised to pay whatever it took to completely rebuild his original truck, not to magically erase her cruel, arrogant behavior, but because the precious memories in his notebook belonged in a running vehicle, protecting those beautiful family moments for as long as that engine would turn. She walked back to her high-rise office later that day with a priceless new perspective. Upstairs, the multi-million-dollar investor meeting was still going on. The wealthy board members chose to wait, refusing to walk away from a highly profitable business deal. Perhaps it was because the oldest, wisest investor in that boardroom had spent 40 years around rich men, learning to easily spot the real difference we both see when a person actually owns their mess instead of hiding it. Dean stepped inside alongside her. Warren Hale sat waiting in the sleek corporate lobby, perched in a modern chair by the glass doors. His worn cap rested in his lap. "You and I know true value takes patience." He had waited for justice far longer than one afternoon. Naomi had arranged the cold, hard proof in a clear, undeniable sequence. She presented it high up in their elite 15th floor boardroom. Every project manager sat alongside Warren and his wealthy, high-flying investment group. Beside them sat the local neighborhood rep, dwarfed by the firm's expensive, high-priced attorneys. She systematically laid out the timeline piece by piece. The junior analyst's property line warning, brushed aside 8 long weeks ago. A critical land conservation filing buried deep on Tyler's personal orders. Plainly visible in public archives, yet utterly hidden from their fancy project files. The crucial historical property deed Warren had actually discovered, which those wealthy elites never bothered comparing to their shiny acquisition map. "Let's look closely at the meeting scheduled for Dean," quietly deleted through Tyler's own account. 11 minutes before the honest mechanic drove his old truck into their pristine lot. She placed printed copies of those ugly, incriminating emails directly before the principal investor. She offered no extra commentary on what those damning messages clearly proved. She didn't need to. Tyler frantically tried twice to rewrite the narrative. He claimed those land papers had never entered their exclusive, high-level corporate pipeline. A technical truth that completely dodged the honest human reality of the situation. He sneered that a blue-collar worker couldn't possibly understand complicated property deeds. But when the quiet room refused to swallow his arrogant, elitist excuse, he claimed their corporate system wasn't designed for hand-delivered documents from some uninvited working-class mechanic. The single father calmly let the fancy boardroom fall quiet before he spoke. He softly explained that if a massive corporation only opened its doors to people wearing $1,000 suits and holding the right prestigious credentials, it would forever ignore honest, hard-working folks who carry the plain truth in a toolbox. A heavy, dead silence instantly filled the room. A senior partner stared coldly at Tyler, then turned his gaze directly to Claire. That sharp look demanded immediate accountability without him having to say a single word. Claire didn't run from it. She addressed them all, the wealthy investors, the lawyers, her staff, and Warren Hale. And the neighborhood rep, admitting she ordered his old truck towed just to protect their image. An order born of pure vanity, dismissing a father's life as a pile of scrap metal. She confessed that their toxic corporate culture, where a junior analyst's formal warning could be brushed aside for 8 full weeks without escalation, was a massive leadership failure that happened directly on her personal watch. She owned up to it plainly, rejecting the corporate double talk that you and I know makes apologies worthless to a real working man. Tyler arrogantly tried to defend himself. She cut him off. When he kept arguing, she calmly said his name once and he finally stopped. She suspended him on the spot, telling him that his executive building access would be completely deactivated before the end of the business day. A thorough audit of the Hale Street files and his past 2 properties where he served as lead developer would aggressively begin first thing tomorrow morning. The entire multi-million-dollar venture was completely restructured over the next 90 minutes. The old community apartments dismissed as cheap scrap would stand. The entire corporate blueprint was being completely redrawn. The historic community center, active since 1952, was saved from corporate demolition. A new repair fund backed by cold corporate cash, plus a city preservation grant Naomi secured that afternoon, would rebuild and preserve those irreplaceable family homes. The exact homes those wealthy elites had dismissed as worthless. The wealthy corporate investors signed the new terms before leaving. Right as they walked out, the older wealthy investor stopped at the door, telling Claire without an ounce of emotion that uncorrected corporate mistakes kill more deals than admitting you were wrong, and he respected her for finally seeing human value over pure profit. Once those rich investors finally left, Claire stood before her remaining team, finally ready to admit her massive mistake. She confessed she had bought a brand new truck that morning. She let that heavy silence hang over the room before continuing. A new truck was the easy part. She had dismissed a good man's entire life and memories as worthless junk, a deep debt no money could ever settle. It was the steep cost of an elitist mindset so deep, she had forgotten what real honest struggle looked like. She was determined to pay that moral debt back with the only currency that actually mattered, which meant actually changing her ways. Proving it through hard, humble work she had never known. The entire office remained completely silent when she finished speaking. Not out of fear, but from the raw impact of seeing a powerful boss finally value people over status. A few quiet weeks passed. The sleek new Silverado blended into the daily grind at the repair shop, sitting by the rusty chain-link fence before the mechanics arrived each morning, hauling heavy gear to muddy work sites at sunset, parked at the lumberyard on Saturdays, while Dean bought supplies to rebuild those community homes that Warren had personally trusted him to help lead. His 2 mechanics immediately respected the power of the new truck. It hauled heavy, greasy engine blocks without making a single sound. It was smooth, quiet on the highway, and had a high-tech backup camera that his mechanic, Marcus joked, felt like cheating after 20 years of straining his neck to see. The high-end pickup truck did exactly what any good tool should do. It just made the hard daily labor smoother without boasting about its luxury price tag. Inside, his old 86 sat on the lift, not junk but a priceless family treasure. You see, Dean dismantled it slowly, treating every part like a precious family memory. He didn't rush, restoring the old truck piece by irreplaceable piece, saving every memory-filled piece and only replacing what was completely ruined. He organized the worn-out gears on carts, waiting for the day they would breathe life again. A vintage restoration expert he knew from a nearby shop in Decatur helped him carefully restore the weathered, rusty metal body. Together they tracked down a rare original axle from a quiet yard in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. That weathered frame was now welded and stronger than ever. The wealthy see a trashy East Atlanta garage, but a father sees his sanctuary. A CEO sees bare scrap, a father sees a canvas of. While a CEO sees worthless old vinyl, a father lovingly restores every stitch of his late wife's favorite bench seat. A CEO sees cheap gray vinyl, a father sees priceless family history. The wealthy see a rusted wreck, but he remembers driving it home with his beautiful late wife Paige. A CEO sees cheap estate sale junk. He remembers a golden autumn morning of pure family hope. They see scrap paper on a dusty dash, but he treasures his wife's handwriting and their sleeping baby boy. The rich man's audit exposed corporate greed. It proved the corporate giant valued dirty profit margins over the safety of neighborhood families. The wealthy developer erased records just to protect his precious corporate balance sheet. The corrupt executive sneaked away, saving his elite reputation from public shame. Expensive lawyers painted his cowardly retreat as a mutual corporate parting of ways. We both know that is just corporate spin. The entire corporate office saw right through his luxury facade to the rotting truth. The powerful CEO brought her formal legal paperwork into the father's dusty garage. Once she finished reciting her cold, corporate legal terms to the working father, the wealthy executive looked past the dirty grease and made a surprising confession. She regretted staying silent in her polished corporate lobby while he stood for truth. A humble working dad holding cold evidence, protected by nothing but his pure, honest soul. The rich woman spoke plainly, asking for no pity or empty forgiveness. He offered true grace before she retreated back to her sterile corporate high-rise. A friend sat on a cheap milk crate, ignoring corporate vanity to watch an honest father do real work. He said the working-class community had discovered how one working father stood tall against a ruthless real estate empire, and they felt a profound gratitude that no wealthy developer's checkbook could ever buy. The quiet father just smiled, knowing true value cannot be bought. He did not fight their corporate machine for fame, awards, or petty credit. He was not looking for wealthy approval, and the only reward this single father ever wanted was keeping his neighborhood safe for local families. Those precious family homes stayed safe. The friend watched quietly, realizing this humble mechanic possessed more value than any wealthy executive. An honest father is worth more than gold, he just shrugged, needing no corporate praise. An honorable life requires no sterile boardroom applause or shiny trophies. One evening, sitting at their modest table while working on a school project, his young son asked if a millionaire's shiny new truck was better than their old rusty one. The single father set his cup down. He treated his son's curiosity with far more respect than any CEO shows her shareholders. To a loving father, his boy's simple questions are more important than any business deal. He agreed that a brand new expensive vehicle is a reliable machine for doing basic work. It has utility, high performance, and plenty of raw horsepower. Plenty of strength to carry heavy loads as their small family shop slowly grew. But he explained that their battered truck has a soul. No wealthy CEO could ever buy its history, no matter how much money they have. $1 million machine can easily take you to some fancy destination tomorrow. But this dented scrap metal reminds you of your humble roots, and keeps the precious memory of his late wife sitting right there in the passenger seat. The young boy wrote it down. A beautiful lesson about love that money can never buy. He stayed quiet, guarding his memories from her cold questions. Dean knew that look, a kid burying memories deep, saving them for the hard times a wealthy person never sees. Imagine this with me, autumn light spilling over the shop, casting deep golden shadows, warming up the cold concrete floor with a gentle glow. Huge shadows shifted slowly as the quiet afternoon slipped away. Outside, that shiny new truck sat parked by the fence, its pristine paint flashing a cold, superficial glare in the sunlight. But inside, that old 1986 truck rested, holding a lifetime of family memories, waiting silently, as if it knew these priceless moments would soon be restored. The single father stood busy at his bench, his back to the door, cleaning a worn-out bracket until a luxury car pulled into the lot. He didn't recognize the engine or the expensive footsteps approaching his shop. He turned. The powerful CEO Claire Vaughn stepped inside holding a heavy box. The expensive corporate suits she used to hide behind were gone today, replaced by plain denim jeans and a simple faded flannel. With sleeves rolled up, she set the heavy box down and opened it in silence. Genuine factory restoration parts for that old 1986 Chevy, sourced directly from a rare vintage vehicle catalog. The kind of hard-to-find components that take weeks to locate, and cost a small fortune because she finally realized they had to fit perfectly in a way that truly mattered. She didn't write a check or use corporate money to cover her guilt. She brought them herself, finally trying to understand what this father's truck actually needed putting in actual work to track those pieces down. She openly admitted she had absolutely no clue how to fix cars, thinking manual labor was just dirty work beneath her wealthy status. But now she was finally realizing the massive mistake she had made. You and I both know the danger of judging folk by their cover. She assumed real success only wore suits and drove expensive cars. She promised to help and stay out of his way, if he would just let her try. Dean put down his greasy rag. He looked past her money, searching for the real person underneath, knowing that genuine honesty was a far better start than she had offered before. He grabbed a clean shop towel from the rack end, handed it to her, gesturing to a dirty bracket that needed wiping down before going back onto his family's irreplaceable truck. She took the towel and got right to work. Outside, that shiny new pickup sat, boasting of a future built only on status and wealth. But inside, under the warm shop lamps, the old truck rested with all its irreplaceable memories. No longer just scrap metal, but healing. Every missing piece being replaced with genuine, loving care. Not because it would sell for millions, or to protect corporate pride, but because she finally realized that the true worth of a life cannot be measured on paper. It is measured by the priceless memories it holds. And if you and I can see that difference, we find what truly matters. She sees an ugly rust bucket, but he sees a lifetime of memories. That old truck sits in her elite parking lot, carrying his entire world.